Joining me now, professor and author of Obama's America, A Transformative Vision of Our National Identity, Ian Reifowitz. Ian, thanks for being here.
Good to see you again, Liz.
All right, Ian, let's jump right into our question of the day today, and that is the fact that ISIS has now claimed responsibility for this terror attack in London that killed 5 total people. This attacker was known to British police, in the past at least, for possible ties to terror. He was dismissed, I guess, in that investigation as being on the periphery of some larger scheme here. But Ian, my question goes right to the politics of the thing, and that is this another case where the fear of being labeled Islamophobic led to the failure to disrupt this plot before he went and killed 5 people, or 4 people, I should say?
Well, look, first of all, I only know what I'm reading in the news reports. I don't have any inside, knowledge of what's going on in MI6 or whatever the British intelligence agencies are. It doesn't look that way, though. From what I read, the intelligence agencies have investigated him over the years, and didn't say that he was peripheral, but decided that he didn't have any ties to terror groups. So then the question becomes, how do you want to have investigations be carried out? Do you want to investigate Muslims differently than other groups? If you find that a person is not tied to terror groups based on the evidence, do you want to keep throwing resources at them and possibly miss people who really are tied to terror groups? The other interesting thing about it is that we heard already a Trump advisor, Sebastian Gorka, who's been linked to Hungarian neo-Nazis, say that this is evidence of why the Trump travel ban should be put into effect. Of course, this gentleman was British-born, so no travel ban would have stopped him. There is a lot of politics around Islamophobia and around terrorism, and I think it behooves all of us to really focus on sticking to the evidence, not going too far in favor of ignoring possible terror from Muslims, but also not going too far in the other direction, so that we ignore groups or members who are not, terrorists who are not Muslims, because we're focused on investigating and surveilling every Muslim up and down the country.
Right, but I actually do agree with Sebastian Gorka on that one point that you just made, and that's the fact that this gives us more evidence, as if we needed more evidence, that Trump's travel ban from these countries ripped apart by jihadi violence, that it is necessary because it only takes one person. That's been the argument from the left, is that, all these millions of people are going to be discriminated against under Trump's travel ban, his temporary moratorium on refugees coming to our nation. But we see this, it only takes one person. It only took one person in Orlando. It only took 2 people in San Bernardino. It only took one person at Fort Hood. These people are coming after us. They're coming after the United States. They're coming after Western Europe. They want to stop our way of life. They want to kill innocent people, not our military in a legitimate type of conflict. They want to inflict this kind of casualty, this kind of terror on us. It does behoove us as a nation to try to keep anybody out where there may be a vulnerability that a terrorist might come with them.
Absolutely. We want to do everything we can to keep out potential terrorists. But this gentleman was born in Britain. Most of the people who was involved in the attacks that you listed were born in the United States. I don't believe all of them were born in the United States, but just about all of them were. So there's a question of what's productive and what's counterproductive. But remember, this can also cut in another direction. When we're talking about groups and you're talking about terrorism, we have a guy whose name is James Harris Jackson, who the other day murdered an African-American in New York City. He traveled to New York specifically to kill a black person, and he did so in Midtown Manhattan. We have Dylan Roof, who killed 9 African-Americans in Charleston. We have James Van Bruin, who murdered the security guard at the Holocaust Memorial Museum. Should we start surveilling every white person who posts a message about hating black people? It only takes one. See, this cuts in a lot of different directions, and I would argue that the most important thing is to focus on evidence. When we're talking about people coming into the United States, we have to do serious vetting, and we have been doing serious vetting. No refugee from any of those countries has committed an act of terror in this country. Are those refugee bans helping, or are they hurting by creating more recruits for ISIS in the long run?
Right, right. And let me interject just for a second, because I want to answer the rhetorical question, and that is, you asked, should we surveil every white person who expresses hate for a black person? And I actually think, tweaking that just a little bit, yes, we should surveil anybody who expresses a realistic desire to inflict harm on another person, regardless of their color, regardless who the color of their potential victim is. Absolutely, we should surveil them. That's what preventative law enforcement does. So I don't think we disagree on that. I mean, I guess this isn't entirely about the travel ban. It isn't about refugees coming here. I mean, like I said, I agree with that point that Sebastian Gorka made, that it only takes one. This is just another example of why, if there is a threat of 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 terrorists trying to disguise themselves as refugees to get into the United States, why that's something we can't afford to ignore, why it would be a danger to you, your family, me, my family, everyone we work with, everyone we know, because these terrorists, they come and they inflict their terror on anybody for any reason just because they want this attention and they hate us, Ian.
Look, I think we agree on the goal here. The goal is to keep Americans safe and at the same time to preserve our values as a country. It's just a question of what's the right way to going about doing it. I don't trust the intentions of Donald Trump. I don't trust the intentions of somebody who's been talking the way he's been talking about the fears that he's been trying to raise. I believe he's raising those fears for political concerns. I think some of the people working for him have good intentions. I don't know about all of them. But I do know that we don't want to succumb to the hyping of fear to the point that we do things that are counterproductive. And we've seen the conservatives have done some of this as well. You may remember there was a report on terrorism from the Department of Homeland Security in 2009 that emphasized the fears coming from right-wing terrorists after the election of a black president. And conservatives got very angry and had that report suppressed. It was written by Darrell Johnson, who was a U.S. Army counterterrorism expert, registered Republican, self-identified conservative, and he said that political pressure made our country more vulnerable. We've got to resist all kinds of pressure, whether it's people worried about Islamophobia or people worried about a government looking at right-wing extremists. We've got to go where the evidence takes us.
Right. And we don't disagree on that. But what I'm saying is yesterday, when we watched this unfold, we saw a lot of liberal pundits, a lot of liberal politicians across the world, not just here in our country, a lot of liberal networks call this attack an incident. They were calling it an incident. Even when ISIS claimed responsibility for this, the liberal networks weren't reporting it that ISIS claimed responsibility. They said a Twitter account, perhaps associated with ISIS, claimed responsibility but offered no proof. Do you feel that that would be the same way that they would structure their news if this were the other way around, what you were talking about? If this were a white supremacist that attacked a Muslim, is that how they would phrase it, couching it like that, or would they just say it?
First of all, you probably watch a lot more liberal media than I do, so I can't give you the details there. I'm assuming if you're talking about journalists, they're probably covering themselves, making sure that they get the story exactly right before they say it, because there have been preliminary releases of evidence, and I certainly respect journalists to make sure that they get something right, even if they have to wait an hour or two before they get it right. I think I can tell you that I've heard the opposite complaint, that when a white person attacks some non-white person in something racial, the mainstream media doesn't call it terrorist, or maybe the right-wing media doesn't call it terrorist. And why aren't they calling it terrorist? What I'd like to see, and I think what you'd like to see, is the same standard applied all around. I think we want to get to facts. We want to treat terrorists as terrorists. We want to call them as terrorists when we know that's what they are, no matter what their skin color or who their target is, because that's how we get to the truth.
Right, and I don't want to see Islamophobia factoring into these investigations, like we saw with the Fort Lauderdale shooter when he went to the FBI office and said what he wanted to do and said what his motivation was, radical Islam. They ignored him. We saw that, in San Bernardino, they had the opportunity to be able to vet that person before she came into the United States, and they didn't do it because of Islamophobia. We saw it in Orlando, that they had known that he was communicating with a radical cleric, and they didn't follow up on it. And in the New York and New Jersey bomber, the same thing. That's all I'm saying. The political aspect here, the fear of being labeled Islamophobic, sometimes does help lead to these plots actually being put into action and innocent people dying. And that is what breaks my heart to see.